It's kind of difficult to hold a conversation without audience for an audience, but we are going to try our best to convey the exhibition and actually the work that we have been doing in the last years about it. So I would start by introducing some of the subjects and also some of the elements that are key to the exhibition. And by doing so, probably the first question or the first remark would be that the exhibition has been made possible, or the origin of it, the seed of it, was a residency. I know that, now that we couldn't travel, and for many artists it has been kind of dramatic, but residency programs and residencies are really key and core elements to artistic production. For the general audience, it's perhaps some concept that they are not super familiar with, but it is the idea that an artist would reside or be inside a community of other artists and other people for a longer period, and then come up with an idea. So it's like the old retreat, when people would take some step aside of their natural environment and go somewhere to kind of learn about others and learn about themselves. Marcus, who is the director of TBA Academy, is also a key person in activating Alligator Head Foundation. They decided that Alligator Head Foundation, which is a conservation project related and oriented towards the regeneration of the reef of corals, but also the sea and fishing in the communities of Jamaica. Actually, he came to the idea of inviting Claudia, who was part of the expedition I did with TBA Academy 2 years and something ago. With Claudia, she was one of the members of the expedition, and take her to Jamaica. And it was from that moment that, the work started to come about. So my first question would be actually for Marcus, if you could imagine that something like that would happen, or what do you have in mind? What's the motivation of inviting artists to a community that knows about art, but envision art probably in a complete different manner? So what it is that you think that also the scientific community, marine biologists, are taking from such an interaction?
Yeah. Well, Chus, thank you very much for the question, first and foremost, right? I think we need to rewind just a little bit to see where the Alligator Head Foundation came from, and then why we're hosting these residencies. So the Alligator Head Foundation was actually born out of a number of these exploratory voyages that we have been doing since 10 years now with the Academy, right? Where we're inviting artists, scientists, environmental activists, conservationists, legal experts, and so on, later more and more indigenous leadership, to come together for a certain amount of time and spend time on a boat, a 39-meter explorer vessel, the Dardanella, to really expose ourselves to the ocean, to be together, to become a collective body together, to be with, on, and in the ocean for an extended amount of time, to sense this together. And on these journeys, we've encountered a couple of phenomenal conservation projects. The first one that we really encountered that was really quite remarkable and miraculous was with a coral reef specialist from the Dominican Republic called Ruben Torres, who in one of the sandy bays of the island had initiated a coral nursery with the boys from the neighborhood. It was a kind of a neighborhood kind of community project that they did to restore the reef. And later on, when we were continuing the journey, we came to Cabo Pulmón, which is a former fishing community that at some point 25 years ago stopped fishing because they realized that the fish stocks were collapsing dramatically, and that they might be able to fish for a little while longer, but the next generation would have tremendous difficulties, and the next generation would have no chance whatsoever. And so they formed this kind of grassroots conservation effort, where they designated a certain part of the ocean as a marine protected area, no fish zone. They defended it against the neighboring fishing communities and so on. And over the years, the sea regenerated dramatically. It was tremendous to see how the ocean and how life in the ocean bounced back, right? It's one of those miraculous places you can go now, and it's completely controlled by the former fishing community, now conservation community. So inspired by this, we first started a coral restoration project through a nursery. And then together with the University of the West Indies, we started making the analysis. They collected data. There was a marine lab where a number of PhD students, but also the faculty of the University of the West Indies would do the data collection and analysis. And after a year, they came back to us and they said, listen, this is a fantastic place to protect, right? And so we started then with the local fishing community to talk about the designation, the site, how big the site, where entry and exit points and all of these kind of things. And after that was established, we started working with the local government to really get this turned into law, that this is a no-fish zone and no fishing area. To do so, then, to manage this site, we created a new foundation, which is the Alligator Head Foundation, which is run locally with scientists, with conservationists, but also with former members of the fishing community that are now nature wardens or they're scientific divers and so on. But to connect that work back to our initial practice, which is TBA 21 Academy and a cultural and contemporary art organization, we decided to host an artist in residency program next to the lab. Right? So this is the answer, the long-winding answer to the first question. Why is this important? I think there's two reasons, right? This is quite a restrictive activity towards the community, right? And even though they were involved in the designation of the site and the design of the site and deciding how big it is and so on, it is quite something to be initially involved in this or be involved from the beginning in this and kind of understand and get the excitement and all of that. But then when reality hits and you still need to go out fishing to earn money, it becomes more and more difficult, right? So the question was, at some point, can we, through inviting artists, also involve the community in the work of the Alligator Head Foundation, but in a completely different manner, right? Where it's not science, a language that is sometimes highly complex and complicated, very often difficult to communicate. So can we involve a different language to embrace the community and spread this and share this knowledge within the community? And I think the previous residents, Susanne Winterling and Joan Jonas, found a completely different way. But Claudia invited 5 members of the community that were woodworkers with lots of experience and knowledge around the wood and how to treat the wood, how to work with the wood. Involved them in that work, and I think this was absolutely unique for any resident so far. But it was also tremendously informative for the community to see what is actually happening behind the walls of the foundation. On the other hand, for the scientists, I think this conversation with artists to have this inherent criticality of contemporary art on the one hand, questioning I would say the disciplines, the methodologies, and also the language of science. But then also having this capacity to ask really profound, maybe sometimes naive sounding questions, but profound questions that are challenging the entire system of how to conduct science is really important. To be challenged from a different discipline that is not kind of this peer review thing, but from a completely different discipline, to be challenged like that in conversation, I think is really important.
And to continue with that, before we go and ask something to Claudia, what is a coral nursery? I know that we know, but since perhaps many people do not know, how does it work?
So over the past decades, the Jamaican reefs, and especially on the northeast coast of Jamaica, where all oceanic currents hit the island, have shifted from a coral-dominated system to an algae-dominated system. This means, and this has a number of reasons. One is being hurricanes, the other one is being virus, third one is being overfishing and severely overfishing. and at a certain time, it was also very fashionable to do dynamite fishing, right? So light up a stick of dynamite, drop it in the water, and just pick up the fish that are slowly floating to the surface, from the surface, and that's your day of fishing, right? So the reef was completely devastated. What you can do is install a coral nursery in the ocean, right? So it's a relatively simple structure where you anchor two floating buoys that are attached by lines to those anchors, right? And the buoys, they hold them in place, and then you just span lines in between. And off these lines, you hang coral seedlings, right? So you go to a healthy coral, you break off a number of branches, and you hang them there. And the way that coral grow and coral multiply, right, is either through sexual reproduction by spawning or by cloning themselves. So if there's no time for spawning, right, or the environment is not friendly for spawning, then they just choose to clone themselves, and that's how they grow and populate and multiply. But you can then fracture these coral parts more over and over and over again, and all of them will grow. And that means that at some point, when they're big enough, you can take them and you can plant them and cement them on the reef. And that's where they start taking, and that's how you plant out and regenerate corals. The ones that we've been growing in the water are staghorn corals, so they're and elkhorn corals. They're a specific type of coral that kind of builds a certain mesh once they start growing, which is a fantastic kind of breeding ground and pupping ground for juvenile fish. So it creates some form of habitat, some form of shelter, some form of ecosystem where juvenile fish then have the possibility and the protection to grow.
Thank you very much. Claudia, I have a question for you. Since we all know that you are a Swiss artist and Switzerland is a little bit like Madrid, so you are not exactly surrounded by the sea, the first naive question would be, when did you discover the ocean? Like, what was the first encounter that actually made you feel something about it? And second, also, what did you encounter in Jamaica that was different and motivate the work?
So I think, when I think about the ocean, and the first relationship I had with it was early on during childhood holidays with my families, and going out there to swim for hours and hours and hours. And at the time, as a kid, I was not diving yet, with like scuba diving. So I would try to stop breathing for as long as I could to observe what I could. And even though I didn't know that well this environment, because, as you said, I'm from the countryside in Switzerland, and I spent actually all my childhood in the countryside, in the garden, in the forest. I was free to roam in this environment. Even though I didn't know it that well, I always was very curious about it. And so when you invited me for the first expedition, it was really mind-blowing for me to go in New Zealand, because that was the open door finally to get to meet scientists, to get more knowledge about it. And that was the beginning of implementing ocean more profoundly into my work.
But when you went to Jamaica, did you kind of knew what you would wanted out of the environment, or did the encounter with an environment that you did not know before change and challenge your work in certain aspects?
I think in Jamaica, the first time I went, because I went before to organize the residency, to find the trunk, which were fallen trees at the time. I was just completely, it was mind-blowing for me. It was incredible to see this luscious vegetation. The trees are gigantic, the leaves are gigantic. Everything, it feels home somehow. And this was really weird in a way that I felt very close to this nature very, very quickly. So I felt an amazing and really great mood and feeling to be there.
I'm asking also because I think we're talking so much about Jamaica, and we're talking about this situation not because in any situation one can produce work, in any situation one can produce a new idea, but in your work, the origin of the material and the intelligence, what this material absorbs from its own environment is fundamental. I think you have been working with the wood of your own countryside, and now this wood is from another location. So this location somehow is here today. So Jamaica is here in this wood. And I think that this is not an obvious reflection for many people, because in industrialized societies, we have been trained to avoid the question of the origin of the materials or even the intelligence of the materials, because the material is just a tool to produce something. It's just a medium, but it's really nothing in itself. And in your work, you kind of restitute the language of the material. So the wood is talking about the corals, but it's also talking about the ground and about the experience of the environment, the weather, the climate change, the ocean of that part. So perhaps you can say, what is this? What did you discover in this wood that is not present in the wood of the many previous sculptures that you did in Switzerland, for example?
So you're right, I'm always sourcing the wood myself, and in the case of the European sculpture, we could call them like that, it's always wood coming from my countryside, where I work with lumberjack to find the trunks. And this wood behind us has incredible properties because it's tropical, it's very heavy, it's full of life, it's very dense, it's very hard, and so difficult to cut. And into this whole family, we have different group of different species of corals, which are defined by the different wood I could find. We have actually also some sponges. The yellow guys here are made out of guinep, a wood that is endemic from the island, and we have the almond wood for the fire corals, the pillar corals made out of willow, some buttonwood, some dogwoods, and more. And all those structure, all what you can see is what I'm trying to reveal through my woodwork, through the sculptures, as I am cutting them with a chainsaw, and then with my team we are sanding them down for ages, actually, to polish them until perfection, to erase the trace of the hand as well, but mostly to reveal what's inside, to see the structure, to see the life that the tree must have, and to show the time as well. So there is this idea of time through the sculptures, as we can see the ring, and then you can understand the way it has been growing. And I love to reveal that to the public.
And I think also this is super important because we were talking about these communities, and one of the big sequels of negative one of colonization is the fact that communities cannot see time as a longer period, but as a short time, because they need to survive. So impoverishment, questions of extraction, dependency, lack of autonomy in the way that they can relate to their own environment, made them over centuries feel that time has an incredible shortage, that they, therefore, sometimes we encounter in certain countries that they live next so near nature, less, let's say, less sensitivity towards questions that we in the West are putting forward. But it's not because they don't feel it, it's just because they have the time of survival, and the time of survival is different than the time of art and the time of sculpture and the time of science. And I think for you, Marcus, do you think that this type of projects, so I was imagining this morning that we could have, the possibility of having the community seeing and experiencing what you have done. And I think that if they would exactly having a little bit back that sense of elongated time, of a time that kind of reciprocates with their idea of knowledge and nature in a much productive way than the times that they have been, by violence, submersed in. So I would like to also to hear what you think, if this is not only a way of them to encounter artists, but somehow to gain a dimension of aesthetic, let's say aesthetic encounter with their own time.
Yeah, I think there's a number of there's a number of other aspects to that, right? To the relationship of nature, and one is this intergenerational trauma of the Middle Passage, to be in a place that you have never chosen to be in, right? You were forced to be there, and I'm sure this manifests throughout generation in a relationship to a place, right? So that's the one thing. But regarding to the community seeing the work and being able to see the work, before the work was shipped, we actually made a presentation and a little exhibition for the Jamaican community and the community of drapers that is right next to the Alligator Head Foundation, or where the headquarters of the Alligator Head Foundation is. And it was really nice to see. It was really nice to see a lot of people coming out, a lot of people really being interested in the work, wanting to see the work, and also the colleagues that helped with the work, right, to be really proud and active and in this presentation. So this was great. I think it is exactly about that, to show other possibilities, right, to open up spaces of realities that are not immediately and only attached to survival, right? And I think a work like this can be a window in this opportunity, or into this possibility. Absolutely.
I like the fact that you were speaking about Switzerland and Jamaica, and suddenly geographically you imagine both sides, right? And since I brought those sculpture here, the idea was to leave something behind as well, and we started to do underwater sculpture park. With the previous shape, I was working with the cactus. So right now we have 3 cacti underwater, and from a family of 9, so we are working on the 3 next. And I really like to think always that those sculpture, the wood shape of the cacti were made out of oak from my countryside in Switzerland. So I kind of did a swap with the cacti going in Jamaica and the coral coming in Europe. And they are not out of wood underwater. They were reproduced out of special concrete that is strong for the current and ocean, etc. And maybe you want to explain how we are taking care of them now.
Well, they are made from concrete, right, which we all know is a kind of carbon-heavy material, but it's been chosen because it has a very rough surface. And for corals to be able to regrow and repopulate a place, you need a kind of rough surface. It's very hard for them to kind of attach themselves to a flat or really a polished surface, right? And so therefore, despite the carbon footprint of the cement, we chose this material because it has a number of properties that would actually then enable them for corals to populate them and start growing on them. So the last batch of corals that we outplanted in these restoration regeneration efforts were actually planted on the base of the cacti. So now the next time when Claudia is going to come and visit Jamaica and come diving with us to see the cacti, there will be a bush of staghorn coral around them with a whole new community of fish living in them.
In this exhibition, for me, what it reveals after installing it is something that I couldn't see before. And it's so interesting that's why probably you do exhibitions, because even if you can do renders and you can talk about it and you can put together works in your mind, when the exhibition comes into life, it brings aspects and elements that before I have not appreciated in the same manner. And one of the most important ones for me is, of course, I knew that Claudia is taking the coral out of the core of the tree. So it's like saying that inside every element of nature, there is the possibility of a mutual understanding of all other elements. So the elements are not in a separation, as we learn from the modern times and from illustration, but actually they are together. And then you can therefore kind of search for that moment of connection and then have a coral out of a tree. But then I also, when I saw the wall painting, I understood the mutuality. Not only you said it's coming from a wave. The wave is a scallop shell, so it makes that wave of a shell that you so often find in some places of the ocean. But then I thought about the waves and the fact that the waves are made of winds, and the winds make that form, and that form is actually again in the sea. Why is it repeated? And then I was thinking, it's exactly that incredible realization that there is a monumental mutuality going on and transfer of information, but then it's also a transfer of form. So I thought, it's as if animals are their own art historians, because somehow they have a sensitivity for form related to a function that anyhow has also a symbolic value. And I was kind of discovering that moment of, why is everything coming together this morning, no? And I just wonder, how do you feel about the relations of all these elements? We have the wall painting, we have the wood and the coral, which are made of different material, but of the same, for the sake of, let's say, of fiction in art. Then you have the digital that is made of artificial material and information, but yet who believes that because you really see that video and you want to kiss them and embrace them like teddy bears. You really want to haptically relate to that digital video. And then you have the wall painting again with a much more vibrant kind of sensation, almost like in an opera at night when the opera finishes and you have this theatrical moment of closure and yet opening. So I just would like to see how this works in your mind. Like, how do you see it now that you see it like me?
Yeah, it's funny you speak about the renderings, because I lived with the rendering now for 2 years almost. So I feel somehow I'm in the rendering, but obviously it's way more powerful, and there is a whole new dimension, which is the emotion and the joy that produced the show to me to be in reality inside. And I really love to oscillate and to have this back and forth between our world and the digital world and the natural world. And this show is bringing everything at once together, because in the cube, which is a series of 4 screens that creates this cube-like sculpture. So it's more than a screen; it's really like a sculpture. The representation of the corals are here to come into life. So some are drowning, some are floating, some are swimming. They are becoming lava, snow. They are pushed by geysers. So it's all those fantasy I have about the wood sculptures that the digital realm permit to me to actually have and transform them and activate them. And I think obviously people will recognize the sculptures into the screens and have also this back and forth between the day room and the night room. And even though we are on the same level, I have the feeling we are soaking in the night room as well, which is even lower than where we are here, because we are going deeper. We are under the ocean, really. And what brings everything together then is obviously this wall painting, this morphism, this 360 degrees of colors and line and spikes sometimes when we arrive into this very dramatic end of the pattern. And obviously optically it's very strong, and everything creates one environment, one world. So I think they live very well together, even though they will have another life later on. The show will be not here for forever, but at the time, that's the way they live together.
But what also brought us together is Chus, no? And even though you grew up by the sea, and I think many of your family are fishermen, right? So there is this close relationship. And even though I think you've written about octopus, the ocean was never really a topic, I find. And so can you But now, lately, part of the curriculum at the school is art and ocean, right? And now this is the second exhibition within 7 days that you curate that has the ocean as a topic. Last week we opened Taloi Havini at Ocean Space in Venice, also curated by you. You will curate next year at Ocean Space as well. So can you speak a little bit about how you approach the ocean as a space, as a maybe theoretical space when you embarked on this position leading the current, and why did you choose to invite Claudia onto the first exploratory voyage of the current?
Well, I think that I am a very good case study, and hopefully I can help younger generations to understand how sometimes education works. So education has been understood in many ways as a way of rejecting some elements of what we are in order to embrace others. And because we wanted to be thinkers and analytic people capable of having a judgment, then nature kind of never fit into that exercise. It seems that if you think through or with nature, you will not be actually neutral enough, because then you would not be taking into account what the text in itself is saying. So there are elements from the outside could not enter the elements from the inside. This is very, very present in a very traditional way of getting educated in the whole 20th century. The 20th century is totally a text-based century for good reasons, and I don't reject any of them. And yet, it's true that it does not help you to understand what are the connections that you establish outside the text that made possible thinking, even if enter in some contradictions with things that you learn through reading. Not long ago, I've been reading an incredible text saying how scientists have been analyzing how the brain that is shaped, like how reading has been actually helping us to shape the brain, how fast we become thanks to reading. And then they have been actually studying the brain of the reader for the last 60 years. And then I was like, for half an hour in the sofa, totally frozen, a little bit scandalized. And then I thought, but is there any study analyzing the brain when the brain does not read and relate to text? And there is not. And then I just sent an email to the person that wrote the book thinking, oh, I'm never gonna get a reply. The reply came in 5 minutes. I'm asking that, is there any study analyzing the millions of those humans that actually establish a relationship with life without text? And what happens to the brain? The brain does learn. The brain does also fast acknowledge things. And then she said, no, it isn't, because that's exactly what's so difficult to analyze. What happens when all the parameters are much more open? So all that to say that I grew in a family where I was the first person attending the school. And I am curious about the part that did not attend the school. And I do understand that in order to provide a further and future education, or let's say pedagogy, so that we would understand what to do. Because for me, education is not only about learning, it's kind of a formation. So to be formed, like the corals of Claudia, to have a new morphology, it would be really fantastic to take into account things totally outside the text. So that's why I came, thanks to you and the invitation of participating in the expeditions much closer to the ocean. It was a complete horror. I cannot swim. My family, I come from fisherman family, they don't swim. My father is working in the sea and he cannot swim. Nobody can. You go to Cuba, you go to Jamaica, you go to the Caribbean, you go to all colonized, and the first thing that the colonists did is to prevent you to go in the sea. The sea belonged to those that conquered the sea, and the sea was a territory of the empire. So for me, what we are doing now with artists, with scientists, is to take that empirization of the ocean back to a space of culture, space of art, a space of epistemology. So that's why I think it's so fundamental. And everyone is asking, but are we going to see more of artists working with scientists and working on the ocean? And the answer is yes, but it's not because of we are going to see more of multidimensional projects, but we hopefully are going to see more of the dimension of, let's say, the parts of the experience that do not enter traditional canonical ways, coming together with those that are, and see what happens. So that's why I think that for younger generations and projects like this and what you are doing in the ocean space and dedicating institutions to the ocean, it's not only a name, it's really an incredible commitment towards a completely different method that we need to implement, what I call like the path towards a non-binary world. But I really hope that we can contribute to it in whatever form. And I think this is a great exercise, I think.
And why were you confident that Claudia would be a great participant?
Oh, that's a very good question.
Yeah.
I encountered the work of Claudia, as it happens, as a total surprise. I was invited to attend the opening of an exhibition in Kunstmuseum in Lucerne. And I read the name, I did not know her. And then it was a friend dragging me. I'm really, really a lazy person. And this person convinced me. And then I entered the first room and I saw a wallpaper, wood carving, swings. And, all of a sudden my brain said, wow. So you can have it all. So the idea of a woman artist that wanted it all, it just completely resonated, because I've been trying to explain it to students, to people. Woman artists it's about intimacy, it's about delicacy, it's about this. No, it's about not wanting to renounce to anything. And therefore, sometimes it sustains itself into the practice in something kind of very delicate, but it's because they wanted the whole planet. So when I went into that first room, I saw main goal, become friends. Second goal, working with her. So because of that, we became friends. And now we are working with Claudia. And I think it's out of an incredible knowledge of the DNA of art history. So I will not claim Claudia is all the time talking about art history, because I don't think it's true, or is very consciously working with that matter, but it's kind of in the DNA. Like you have seen it, you have experienced it in museums and collections, and then it just, go, let's say, osmotically in, without like all my students, perhaps even without knowing the names of those that did the works, but still, it just penetrates the texture and the tissue of your organs. So if we are talking about coming to the Museum Thyssen, which is a context of more canonical masterpieces, painting, old classics, ideas of structuring the perception and experiences of art in such a, let's say, Western, classic, beautiful also way. If you want to challenge that substance, you need to put something that could coexist with joy with the past and challenge it, let's say, in a bold, friendly manner. And I think that this is exactly what Claudia can do, because it pushes questions of form, composition, immersion, to moments that it goes from classicity and formalism to digital and new media tensions and environment. So I thought this is really fantastic if we can do that in Madrid. And I thought also in the context of Spain, it's very important, certain proficiency and certain perfection that is very present in her work, because this is a country that has been always having some sort of a complex of inferiority and adores perfection. Not that we are really working towards it many times, but it's kind of a goal, and there is some sort of admiration when things just kind of fall and they just poof, perfect. So, and this is part of what forms our underground culture. And I think that this is also some element to take into account: the colors, the vibrancy, synergy, rhythm, and dynamics. So because her work is very dynamic, and we are in a society that wants to be dynamic, wants to really, we are seeing it even in the pandemic. People are afraid, people lost so much, and still the main drive is to push towards maintaining social dynamics, no matter what.
And Claudia, maybe for you, because you've supported causes many times. You've given work for auctions that then supported the orangutans and others. But this now, especially with the corals in the ocean, with the cacti in the ocean, you actually have given work to actively contribute to a restorative and a regenerative practice of the reef. How do you feel about that? And do you think there's a new departure for you in your practice and your work, the way that you think also about the objects that you create?
Yeah, I like to think somehow it's possible to do art for non-human species, and so that's the first goal, because it's monument for the corals to grow up on. And then it's obviously for the community there. The Alligator Head Foundation has a glass bottom boat in case you are not swimming or not diving. So there is no excuse, you cannot see the sculptures and the corals growing on them. And then it's a fantastic way to communicate and create awareness, because we have beautiful image of the sculptures underwater, and obviously the symbolic is really strong to have a family of cacti underwater, the cacti that explore a possible future of our Earth, very dry. And there is a great clash that is created having this shape under the water. So, yeah, I'm really grateful this is possible because of the foundation and TBA and people like you and scientists around that as well. And I recall also amazing discussion I had with scientists. We have been working together for the occasion of this show and other project. For example, marine biologist David Graeber, that is a specialist in corals. So he knows all about marine lives and corals, but now is into sperm whales and is trying to find a way to decode their language, which I just find so incredible. So it's somehow diving into an alien world, because at the moment we don't know how. I mean, imagine if we could understand what they have to say, and we know now they are extremely intelligent, and obviously I'm just grateful for the opportunity to be able to speak with such a scientist, or for example Colin Ford from Coral Morphologic, that also gave us some footage for the entry video that explained about the production of the wood sculptures and the story behind the corals, and that those footage are so important for the understanding of the show, since you understand how it looked like to see a coral, a bioluminescent or biofluorescent coral underwater. And I love this link between the entrance of the show and the dark room in the back, where I tried to recreate this feeling, since obviously most of us cannot see that in real life.
Chus, maybe you want to talk briefly about the video at the entrance, because somehow you chose not to have an introductory wall text, but you chose a different format. And why did you choose it, and what did you actually make at the end?
Yeah, I want to describe that the exhibition, when you enter, you encounter a video. So you encounter a video, and in this video, we wanted to provide exactly because of what was I saying about text, to provide an introduction that was not text-based, and then people would just enter into the main exhibition. And this video, it's so interesting that after so many years and working with an artist, talking about what are these images, are these documentation of the journey to Jamaica, is this then a witnessing type of video, and how can we just say what we want to say without informing through images to the audience. So at the end, we came to the conclusion that Claudia would do a selection, a narrative selection in images, of going to Jamaica, encountering the people, working with the pieces there. I think it's so beautiful that people have an opportunity to see how the pieces are made. I think the making of them, it also reminds about the encounter of this human and non-human, and gives an idea of what we are talking about, but showing really how she reacted in the environment. So at the end, it ended up doing that selection, and then I thought about doing a text, which is like, I don't know how to call it, a fictional text, where the corals are talking about themselves. So the video is just saying or telling about their surprise of meeting Claudia, because we always talk about our surprise in meeting them, but I thought it would be very beautiful if they also tell us about their surprise in meeting Claudia. And the fact, imagine how surprising it is for a coral reef to know about an artist that is there to make more corals. So this is just immense. So that's what I did in the first video with Claudia. And I think that is very beautiful, because in this first video and in the second video, which is a more high-end digital animation activation of the corals, in both, there is something for me absolutely fundamental in life, which is a naive, sweet, beautiful way of giving yourself into experiences without cynicism. So you just want to enjoy. And I think that this is a balance that's very present in the exhibition. And it's and I think Claudia has been so many times telling me about the quotes of cartoons that we have seen when we were kids, or quotes of pop elements in culture. And for me, the major glory of this exhibition would be that some kids come and TikTok in it and start just using it and relating to it, and encounter the exhibition, encounter art, encounter the corals, encounter the ocean, and encounter their own communities inside this kind of environment. And I think that would be really great if people just start to, navigate and be immersed in whatever form they consider that it brings them joy and an opportunity to reflect on their own lives.